story. Was entered the neighbor's house in the blizzard. When I was 8 years old, my family had a little vacation home in Colorado. It was an old place, over 40 years old, and my dad had spent years maintaining it. I always felt a sense of warmth and safety there. But that winter, something happened that still haunts me to this day. A massive blizzard had swept in, covering everything in thick layers of snow. My brother Josh and I, full of excitement, decided to have a snowball fight outside. The property was perfect, a winter wonderland surrounded by woods with a dead-end road leading to a few neighboring houses. One of those houses was almost always empty, so we often played there without thinking twice. That day, Josh picked that very property to set up his fort. The game was simple. We each built a fort, placed a giant snowball, the jewel, inside, and tried to steal each other's jewel. Josh ran off down the road, vanishing into the whirling snow, and I waited for his signal, but the whistle never came. 10 minutes passed. At first, I thought he was just trying to trick me, but something felt off. The wind howled around me, sending a chill through my bones, and an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. I decided to go find him. I trudged through the deep snow, my boots sinking with every step. Silence. No laughter, no footsteps, just the eerie sound of the wind. I cut through the woods, approaching his fort, my heart pounding harder with every step. But when I got there, Josh was gone. His fort stood untouched, the snow perfectly still, as if he had vanished into thin air. Then a voice cut through the cold. "Excuse me? Are you looking for your brother?" I spun around. An older woman stood at the front door of the neighbor's house. She smiled, but something about that smile felt wrong. My stomach twisted. I told her we were just playing a game, and she replied with a strange, almost too calm voice. "Your brother isn't here." I took a step closer, hesitating. And that's when I saw it. A shadow. A face peeking from an upstairs window. For a moment, my heart leapt. Was it Josh? But no. The figure wore a black beanie, their face partially hidden. Watching me. The woman extended a hand, her smile fading slightly. "Come inside," she said. "You must be cold." That's when I felt it. Pure dread. I screamed Josh's name at the top of my lungs. No answer. Then, from inside the house, heavy footsteps. Someone was moving, coming closer. Panic took over. I looked down and saw footprints in the snow. Josh's footprints, but they didn't lead to the house. They led back to the woods. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. The wind stung my face as I bolted back toward our house, slipping, stumbling, gasping for breath when I finally made it. Inside, Josh was already there. My legs nearly gave out. His face was pale, his breath ragged, and when our eyes met, he whispered, his voice shaking. They tried to get me to go inside too. My dad, alarmed, grabbed his coat and marched down the road to investigate. The neighbor's house was silent. The door, locked. No lights, no movement. Later, we learned that the owners weren't even there that weekend. The police were called. They searched. They found nothing. To this day, I don't know who that woman was, or what would have happened if we had stepped inside. Story 2. The Devil's Forest. It was supposed to be just another ski trip. A few winters ago, when I was 21, my friends and I took a trip to Vermont, eager to carve through the snow and lose ourselves in the thrill of the mountains. We were skiing at a massive resort, probably Killington, and honestly, we were having the time of our lives. But that changed on our second day. We had just reached the top of a lift when they appeared. Two girls, Taylor and Devon, stunning, dressed in sleek ski gear, their faces calm, unreadable. They approached us casually, like they had done this 100 times before. "You guys up for something more exciting?" Their voices were playful, but there was something about the way they looked at us. Something cold. They told us about a secret trail, a place called Devil's Forest, a glade trail rarely open, untouched by most skiers. Dangerous, but thrilling. We should have questioned it. We should have hesitated, but we didn't. We were drunk, careless, and curious. We followed them. They led us far past the marked trails, deeper into the mountain. The trees grew thicker, the silence more oppressive. Then the girls handed us a bottle of liquor, unmarked. I took it, my fingers stiff from the cold. My friends drank heavily, laughing, passing it around. But something felt wrong, the way the girls watched us too closely, the way they barely drank themselves. I pretended to take a sip. I wish my friends had done the same. We kept skiing, the trees closing in, the trail narrowing. The snow beneath us untouched, like no one had been here in a long, long time. When we finally reached the bottom of the trail, my stomach dropped. There was no lift, no signs, just an endless stretch of dark, dense forest. Then one by one, my friends started dropping. First Adam, then Chris. Their laughter faded into silence, their bodies swaying before collapsing into the snow. I stared at the girls, my breath ragged, my pulse hammering. They just stood there, watching, smiling. That's when I knew. We had been drugged. Taylor and Devon didn't say a word. They just turned and disappeared into the woods. I forced my legs to move, stumbling after them, following their tracks in the snow. My vision blurred, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. And then I saw them. They weren't alone. A group of men stood near a van, their silhouettes sharp against the white snow. The girls walked up to them, laughing, gesturing back toward the trees, toward us. I didn't wait to find out what they were planning. I ran, my legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept going. I shook one of my friends awake, whispering, begging him to move. We had to get out of there. Minutes passed, then an hour. We sat in the snow, waiting for the others to come to, our bodies trembling, not just from the cold, but from fear. We never found out who those girls were or what they really wanted. But deep down, I know it wasn't just about stealing our skis. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that we narrowly escaped something much, much worse. Story 3. The Bear on the Frozen. Lake every winter, my friends and I have this tradition. We head out onto a frozen lake near our town, peaceful, serene, and a little eerie. There's something about it, something unnerving in the stillness, but we never let it stop us. One night, during a heavy snowfall, we decided to take our usual walk across the ice. The wind howled through the trees and the snowflakes twisted in the air, casting a soft blanket over everything. The ice was thick, solid, and the moon was full, hanging high above, casting an otherworldly glow over the scene. It looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare. We walked further out, our boots crunching on the ice. Everything was quiet, too quiet, and that's when we saw it, a shadow on the far side of the lake. At first, we thought it was a bear, huge, hunched over, moving slowly, almost gliding through the snow. It was the kind of sight that makes your heart skip a beat. But as it got closer, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't a bear, it was A man wearing a bear suit. The sight of it sent a chill deep into my bones. Why was he out there? What was he doing? And then we saw him dragging something. A small black bag. The world around us seemed to freeze. We stood there, staring, our hearts racing. Something was off. This wasn't right. And then we watched as he did something that made my stomach turn. He stepped out of the bear suit and began smashing a rock into the ice, trying to break through. The sound of it echoed across the lake, sharp, jarring, like something from a horror movie. Suddenly he looked up, his eyes locked onto ours. Panic, he yelled, and that was all it took. We turned and ran as fast as we could, our legs moving, faster than I ever thought they could. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming, but all I could think about was getting the hell out of there. We didn't stop until we reached the car, doors slamming behind us. We sat there in silence, trying to catch our breath. The air in the car felt thick, suffocating, and we could still hear that echoing sound of the rock hitting the ice in our minds. But what haunted me the most wasn't the suit, it wasn't the smashing of the rock, it was the bag. We never found out what was inside. But a few months later, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a missing persons report for a child in our area. The timeline, it matched. I can't help but wonder if what we saw that night was a sickening coincidence, or if we were witness to something much darker. Story 4. The Man in the Basement. It was a quiet evening in early autumn when my friend Mark and I decided to check out the old, abandoned house on the edge of town. We'd heard rumors about it for years, whispers of strange noises and unsettling sightings, but neither of us ever had the courage to venture inside. That night, though, something felt different. We'd been drinking, laughing, but there was this tingling sense of dread in the air. The house stood tall, dark, like a giant that had been abandoned for decades. Its windows were boarded up, and the doors were creaking in the wind, like they wanted to keep us out. But Mark, he was always the braver one. He smiled at me and pushed open the front door with a rusty creak, stepping inside without a second thought. Reluctantly, I followed. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the place smelled like rotting wood and decay. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet as we crept through the halls, our flashlight beams dancing off the crumbling walls. Every room seemed frozen in time, as if the house had been abandoned in a hurry. No one left to lock the door, no one to call for help. We made our way down to the basement. There was something off about it. The stairs leading down were narrow, dark, and the air grew colder the closer we got. Mark, always the one to push forward, took the first step onto the bottom stair. I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. He turned to me and whispered, "It's just a house, man. Let's see what's down there." I felt my heart thudding in my chest, but I followed. The basement was pitch black. The only light we had was the faint beam from our flashlights, trembling in the cold, musty air. The walls were lined with old crates, broken furniture, and rusted tools. But what caught my attention was the shadow. At first I thought it was just the flicker of the flashlight, but when my beam passed over it, I froze. In the far corner of the basement, there was a man. He was hunched over, his back to us, his head bent low as if he were working on something. He was motionless, but somehow I knew he knew we were there. The cold that had been creeping in the basement suddenly grew heavier. My breath caught in my throat. "Mark!" I whispered, my voice trembling. Mark didn't hear me. He was too busy poking around, his back turned. I couldn't take my eyes off the man. His ragged clothes were old, tattered, and his skin was pale, almost grey, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He was silent, too silent. Then, just as I was about to turn and run, the man lifted his head slowly. I saw his face. It was horrible, distorted. His eyes were wide open, but they were empty, like two black pits staring back at me. His lips cracked into a twisted smile and he whispered, "You shouldn't have come down here. I don't know what happened next." Everything went dark, and I found myself on the basement floor, gasping for air. Mark was standing over me, shaking me. "Come on, get up, we have to go." He wasn't acting normal. His voice was panicked, but his eyes were wild. He was sweating. I stumbled to my feet, dizzy, my mind racing. As we ran up the stairs, the sound of footsteps followed us, slow, deliberate, heavy. We reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I could feel something behind us, something getting closer. I could hear the breathing. Finally, the door cracked open. We burst outside, breathless, terrified. We didn't look back. I never spoke to Mark again after that night. He moved away not long after, and I don't blame him. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees and the house on the edge of town stands silent in the distance, I hear it, footsteps, and I swear I can hear that voice again. "You shouldn't have come down here."